What happens after the darkness ends? Not to the world in general, not to humanity as an abstract collective moving through an extraordinary threshold together, but specifically, precisely to you. If you are a light worker, if you have spent this lifetime carrying something that most of the world never fully recognized, holding a frequency that the surrounding environment was not designed to support, doing the inner work with a consistency and a seriousness that most people around you could not entirely understand, then what happens to you after the 3 days of darkness is not the same as what happens to everyone else. The Pleiadians want to speak about this directly today, about the specific experience that awaits the souls who have been carrying the work of this lifetime with genuine seriousness, about what changes, about what becomes available, about what is given back to those who have been giving so much for so long. This is not a comfortable transmission to deliver with careful hedging and cautious qualification. The Pleiadians say it directly. After the 3 days of darkness, light workers will experience something that most of them have been longing for without knowing exactly what they were longing for throughout their entire lives. They will come home to themselves. Stay with this until the end, because what the Pleiadians describe about the specific nature of that homecoming and what it means for the life that follows it is what this entire transmission is building toward. Before the Pleiadians describe what happens after the 3 days of darkness, they want to acknowledge something that they say is important context for everything that follows. They want to acknowledge what light workers have been carrying, not in a general spiritual sense, in a specific, honest, genuinely seen sense. The specific weight of this specific kind of incarnation, because the Pleiadians do not transmit empty comfort. When they say they see what light workers have been carrying, they mean something precise. They mean the sensitivity, the quality of being genuinely, physically, sometimes overwhelmingly sensitive to energies and frequencies and emotional realities that most of the people around you have not been able to perceive. The sensitivity that made ordinary environments, crowded places, conflict-laden spaces, the ambient emotional weight of a world in significant distress, genuinely more difficult to navigate than it appeared from the outside. That made being alive, in the conditions of ordinary human experience, a more physically and energetically demanding undertaking than most people would understand. They mean the loneliness. Not the ordinary loneliness of social isolation, though many light workers have experienced that as well, but the specific loneliness of carrying something that most of the people in your life, however loving and however well-intentioned, could not quite see or quite meet, of navigating an inner landscape that was consistently richer, more complex, and more demanding than what ordinary conversation could accommodate, of knowing things that the ordinary frameworks of the culture had no adequate language for, and living with the persistent sense of being in some fundamental way not quite met by the world you were inhabiting. They mean the exhaustion, the particular quality of tiredness that comes not from overwork in the ordinary sense, but from the sustained effort of holding a frequency that the surrounding environment is not designed to support, of being, in effect, a frequency holder in conditions that consistently press toward lower frequencies, of maintaining something open and alive and genuinely caring in circumstances that routinely argued for closing. They mean the doubt, the long periods of questioning whether any of it was real, whether the inner knowing could be trusted, whether the sense of purpose that kept returning, however many times practical necessity or social pressure argued for setting it aside, was genuine or simply the elaborate self-justification of a soul that could not quite fit into the ordinary world. The Pleiadians see all of this. They have always seen it. And what they want to say, in the specific context of what happens to light workers after the 3 days of darkness, is that all of it, every moment of the carrying, every moment of the loneliness, every moment of the exhaustion and the doubt, was real, was seen, was never small or meaningless or without consequence in the larger field. And after the 3 days of darkness, it ends. Not through any external rescue or cosmic reward delivered from above, but through the natural consequence of a threshold that was always going to arrive. A threshold for which the entire long preparation of a Lightworker's development has been building. A threshold that, once crossed, changes the fundamental conditions of the carrying so completely that what was once heavy becomes, if not weightless, then genuinely different in kind. Here is what the Pleiadians say actually happens to Lightworkers after the 3 days of darkness. The first thing is the lifting of the veil of forgetting. For the entire span of this incarnation, and for the many previous incarnations that have been part of the long development of a Lightworker's soul, there has been a perceptual limitation in place. A veil between the ordinary awareness available in incarnated human consciousness and the fuller awareness of what the soul actually is beyond this particular body and this particular lifetime. This veil serves a purpose during incarnation. It allows a soul to be fully present in the specific circumstances of a specific lifetime without being constantly overwhelmed by the breadth of what it is in its fuller nature. It allows genuine engagement with the specific work of the specific incarnation without the distraction of complete access to everything that has been known and everything that has been experienced across many previous incarnations. But it also, consistently and sometimes painfully, limits access to the fuller understanding of what the specific life is for, to the broader context within which the specific challenges and the specific gifts and the specific experiences of one incarnation make complete and satisfying sense, to the direct knowing of what consciousness actually is when it is not filtered through the limitations of a single physical body in a single physical lifetime. After the 3 days of darkness, this veil lifts. Not partially, not gradually over years of sustained spiritual practice, but with a completeness and a clarity that the ordinary conditions of human incarnation have not previously made available. Lightworkers, in the expanded awareness of the post-darkness period, will have access to something they have been reaching for throughout this entire lifetime without always knowing exactly what they were reaching for. A direct, immediate, genuinely felt knowing of what they actually are, of where the soul came from before this incarnation and what it agreed to do in coming, of why the specific challenges that have been the most defining features of this lifetime were the specific challenges this particular soul needed in order to develop the specific capacities that this specific moment in planetary evolution requires. The understanding will not arrive as information to be processed intellectually. It will arrive as recognition, as the direct felt experience of something that was always true finally becoming accessible to the awareness that has always inhabited it. And with that recognition comes something that most light workers have never experienced with complete consistency in this lifetime. A quality of inner peace that does not depend on anything being different from how it is. That does not require circumstances to be favorable or questions to be resolved or the purpose to be fully articulated or the contribution to be externally recognized. A peace that arises simply from the direct knowing of what one is and why one is here. This is the first and most fundamental thing that happens to light workers after the 3 days of darkness. The second thing is the activation of what the Pleiadians call the full gift. Every light worker came into this incarnation carrying specific gifts, specific capacities that have been developed across many lifetimes of sustained work and are now available in this incarnation in a form that can be expressed in the conditions of human experience. The particular quality of compassion that has been built through enough suffering to genuinely understand suffering from the inside. The specific form of clarity or creativity or healing capacity or teaching ability or simply the capacity for genuine presence that is this particular soul's particular contribution. In the conditions of the old frequency, these gifts have been available. but only partially, always somewhat muted, always somewhat filtered through the density of the energetic environment and the perceptual limitations of the veil and the exhaustion of carrying the frequency in conditions that did not support it. After the 3 days of darkness, in the genuinely altered frequency conditions of the world that follows the threshold, the gifts come fully online, not as a sudden magical transformation that produces abilities that were not previously present, but as the full, unfiltered, undimmed expression of what was always genuinely there. The healer whose capacity for genuine healing was always real, but was always somewhat limited by the density of the environment in which it was working, finds that the same gift, in the altered conditions, reaches further and lands more deeply. The teacher whose understanding was always genuine, but was always somewhat limited by the gap between what could be transmitted and what could be received, finds that the altered receptivity of those around them allows what is known to be more fully understood. The light carrier whose presence has always genuinely shifted the quality of the field around them finds that what was once a subtle and often imperceptible contribution becomes something that can be genuinely felt by those who encounter it. The full gift, expressed in the full conditions that the post-darkness period makes available, is what the long development of a lightworker's many lifetimes has been building toward. The third thing that happens to lightworkers after the 3 days of darkness is the end of the loneliness. This may be the most personally significant of all the changes for many lightworkers, because the loneliness that has been one of the defining features of this kind of soul's experience of incarnation, the persistent sense of being not quite fully met, of carrying something that the ordinary world could not quite receive, of navigating an inner landscape that was consistently more complex and more rich and more demanding than what ordinary human connection could accommodate. This loneliness does not end simply because the circumstances of the external world improve. It ends because the conditions that produced it change fundamentally. In the altered frequency conditions of the post-darkness period, the perceptual barriers that kept the inner reality of one soul genuinely inaccessible to another, the barriers that made genuine mutual recognition so rare and so precious in ordinary human experience, these barriers thin significantly. What was once the experience of only the most extraordinary moments of genuine human connection becomes, gradually, the baseline of ordinary encounter. Lightworkers, who have been carrying a frequency that most of the people around them could not quite reach or quite recognize, find themselves in a world where what they carry is increasingly perceivable, where genuine resonance, genuine recognition, genuine mutual meeting becomes not the exception, but the increasingly available norm. The specific loneliness of the light worker, the loneliness of the frequency holder who has always been somewhat ahead of the surrounding field, does not disappear all at once. The adjustment from a lifetime of carrying this loneliness to the genuinely altered relational conditions of the post-darkness world is itself a process, one that takes time. One that requires the development of new relational capacities alongside the dissolution of the protective strategies that the old loneliness required. But the direction changes, decisively, irreversibly. The movement from isolation toward genuine community, from managed distance toward genuine meeting, from the rare exception of true recognition toward its increasingly available presence, this movement begins, for light workers, in the period immediately following the 3 days of darkness. And it does not reverse. The fourth thing is what the Pleiadians describe as the beginning of the work that was always meant to be done. Throughout this lifetime, and throughout the many previous lifetimes that have constituted the long preparation of a light worker soul, there has been a quality of work that was being done in preparation for something. The clearing of old patterns, the development of specific capacities, the building of inner stability and genuine compassion, and the quality of presence that can hold high frequencies without being destabilized by them. The slow, consistent, often frustrating work of becoming genuinely ready for something whose exact form was not always entirely clear. After the 3 days of darkness, the work that was being prepared for begins. Not the preparatory work, the actual work, the specific expression of the specific gifts in the specific conditions that require them. The contribution that was always encoded in this soul's particular development finally finding the circumstances in which it can be made most fully and most effectively. For many light workers, this will feel like the beginning of something they have been waiting for throughout their entire lives. Not waiting in the passive sense of postponed beginning, but waiting in the sense of moving steadily towards something that was always genuinely coming. The sense that the work of this period, whatever specific form it takes in this specific life, is the work that everything else has been building toward. This is the gift of the post-darkness period for light workers. Not comfort or rest, or the relief of difficulty ended, but the arrival of the most meaningful, most genuinely appropriate, most deeply fulfilling work that a developed soul can do. The work of being fully what one is, in conditions that genuinely support its full expression. Are you ready? The Pleiadians ask this not with any implication that readiness is something you may lack. You have been preparing for this your entire life. The specific challenges you have navigated, the specific development you have undergone, the specific qualities of consciousness you have built through everything you have been through. All of it has been preparation for what is coming. The question is not whether you are ready. You are ready. The question is whether you know it. Take what resonates. Leave what does not. And trust yourself completely to know the difference. This content is offered for spiritual reflection, symbolic interpretation, and personal insight only. It is not presented as scientific fact, medical advice, or a prediction of real-world events. The narration in this video is generated using artificial intelligence voice technology. Please use your own discernment and personal judgment when engaging with this material.